I am the warden. This is NaNoWriMo video journal, day 1. Technically it's actually day 2, but this is all regarding day 1's activities, because I wasn't able to do this yesterday. My purpose and intent behind doing video diary of these events is to basically help myself keep track of train of thought, intent and purpose and everything like that. And basically just kind of document the entire process. So far actually so good. I actually did 1,645 words, or 42 words, which is about 25 short of the goal. But I figured that was actually close enough because it reached kind of a natural stopping point. The biggest decision obviously was putting my foot down as far as what actual story I was going to write, because I was torn between doing a kill shot short novel, which would have been related to a lot of the other work I did. But what I've decided on doing was to actually do a fantasy novel, branch off and do something completely different with a different setting. What I've chosen to do is I call mine Messenger. That's the name of my story, at least at the moment. And the story is about an idea that I've been kind of tinkering with for the past year, maybe 2, maybe even longer, give or take. And that one of the big things I find about fantasy, this is the part where I point out that I have a lot of cats and dogs who like to make a lot of noise while I'm talking. The big thing about fantasy is that it's all based on one particular concept, and that being the adventurer. All fantasy, even in novels and fictions, seems to be built on this premise that there are basically mercenaries who will not only go out there and do the work that no one else seems to be available to do, as far as like any kind of law enforcement, soldiers, the king's men, any of this kind of stuff, but these mercenaries will not only do the job, but will save the world in the process. And there's always been something about it where, it's always very cool to play, and it's always been very noble, and it's always been very heroic. But there's something about it that just doesn't seem right. It always seems really kind of tacked on. It doesn't really seem to kind of coalesce with a lot of these other worlds. And that's something that I wanted to change, was to, rather than take a fantasy world and kind of tweak it and adapt it to say, well, what if it was a fantasy world where it was modern times with magic? Or what if it was a fantasy world that never had magic? Or the dragons had died thousands of years ago, now they're coming back. Rather than take the same fantasy and just twist the setting a little bit, I wanted to rebuild something with a completely different angle on how the story would work, and basically how the characters would come into the story. The idea I have behind it originally was actually for a campaign setting. But when it comes to fantasy, and especially too because this is something that I want to build from scratch, with very little similarities between many other worlds, which is fine, because in all honesty I haven't really read a lot of fantasy anywhere near as much as what's out there. So I figured that actually writing a short story would allow me to kind of flesh it out and fill in the details as I went along. So that's what I'm doing. So it's called Messenger, and the reason why is because there's a very overlooked part of history, real world history I'm talking about here. At some point in time, people were dependent on messengers to deliver messages. Declarations of war, declarations of peace, family members who have passed away, inheritances, just overall messages and how people are doing. This was a major point of how people stayed in touch and communicated, especially on a national level. There had to be a particular person who actually traveled across the countryside delivering these messages, whether or not they were delivered in person, or if they were packages that were actually being dropped off and delivered. Someone had to take care of this, and the idea of someone who is basically traveling the countryside, going from place to place on demand of basically a client or a customer, it's not that different from an adventure, but at the same time too, it's an entirely different spin on how the process works, of how you come into the adventure. And so that's what I'm looking at this as. So the idea behind it is that in this particular world, which doesn't have a name or anything yet, I'm basically building from the starting location and building it out as I go, as I need to. There are messengers who do exactly this. They go around delivering messages and packages and basically maintaining communication between different communities. In this particular world, there is no one big nation. Everything is divided into separated, almost kind of walled, gated, hidden communities of humans and the other kind of common races that you would expect. Everything else in between is open, wild landscape. Basically, the way I'm going for is the common races are the minority. When they step outside their communities, they are basically in the wild, and the wild will swallow you up and spit you out. These people travel through that when no others would to get things done. And I picture these people as being very much esteemed as if they were knights. That this is a very noble cause that they do, but when you're actually in it knee deep, it's very dirty, it's very gritty. They are given a lot of respect. They have symbols within a community. There's always a house that's set aside for a messenger, and this is where they keep some of their stuff so that they can, when they know wherever town they're going to next, they have, supplies and gear and everything that they need. So it's a very noble profession, but like all noble professions, there's a lot more to the work than appears on the surface, than the legends and the story tell. So that's the angle that I'm going off right now. And so far it's actually so good. Once, when you have the basic principle, I find it's really easy to flow from there because there's been many ideas about this that I've been playing with. So the first day actually was written on the drive home from my medical appointment because I had a cortisone injection done into my foot, which is doing wonders at the moment. And it was one of those things where I basically just figured, okay, well, let's just have it start where the main character, whose name is Thomas, and I actually get that from, there's absolutely no way any of you are going to know and recognize this. Let me see if this will show up. This is something that I did years and years ago. My first marriage, actually. It was a character and a symbol that I came up with for some stories that were posted online on AOL. AOL. That's how long ago this was. So I decided to bring that character back, but in a different fashion. Back then he was actually known as a hunter. Now I'm going to have him as a messenger. So that's how the story's going, everything so far. Obviously, it's just beginning to scratch the surface. 1 day down, 29 days to go. And then we'll see how it goes from there. So I might keep this up on a daily basis if I can. Otherwise, I'll come back and do it whenever the moment strikes me.